Every once in a while, I like to find games that just seemingly appear out of nowhere. The kind of games that when I take a quick glance over their store page and screenshots, I tend to think, this looks like it could be some dumb fun. And it usually turns out that, yeah, these games are some dumb fun, like the time I looked at Black Sat Under the Skin, a game based off of the comics of the same name, where you're an anthro cat detective solving a murder mystery. Would never have found that if it didn't just show up randomly during one of the many themed Steam fests. And I had a lot of fun with that game, and a lot of fun making that video, and in the process, relearned a part of myself that I had forgotten about. But my long lost interest in sexy anthro girls is not our topic for today. What we are here for is another detective game that showed up on my Steam page, Nobody Wants to Die, a cyberpunk neo-noir game that is a debut title of Polish developers Critical Hit Games, released back in 2024. Now, I wasn't sure what I'd be getting into from this game, but the developer's side mentioned that they want to compete in the narrative game segment and to create story-driven games with unique mechanics. And looking at the screenshots, you got me interested. You got these flying cars and an airship that seems to be flying way too low. Hope nothing bad happens to the Icarus.
Foreshadowing is a literary device.
And a screenshot where you get to watch somebody about to stab someone else. I think we might find out who the serial killer is. But I see cyberpunk and noir together, and you got my attention. So let's get into it. The game takes place in New York in the year 2329, and for some reason, everyone decided to go back to a 1940s aesthetic. In this future, people have figured out immortality through the use of technology called ichorite, which is planted in a person's brain and carries their consciousness. Now, when a person is sick, old, or dying, or any combination of the three, they can have their ichorite transplanted into another, ideally younger and healthier body. And you're probably thinking, neat, but where are they getting these bodies? When a person turns 21, they're automatically enrolled into a subscription service where they have to pay to keep living in their own body. And if you can't afford to pay the subscription fee, then your body will get auctioned off to someone richer than you so they can use it. And the richer you are, the better your next body will be. But if you're not as wealthy, then you're gonna have to settle with a body that has issues such as a history of drug addictions or medical issues like high blood pressure, such as the case for our protagonist, James Kara. James is a detective who has been put on leave from his job at the mortality department, which I assume is just the futuristic police force, due to an accident he caused while on a case 2 weeks prior. Although on leave, he has been tasked by his sergeant to collect the ichorite of an elite known as Edward Green, who has been found dead. And given he's not officially back on the force, he's been assigned a liaison to watch over him by the name of Sarah Kai. While heading to retrieve the ichorite, he finds the body of the victim burned, their ichorite destroyed, and suspects that this is now a homicide case, which quickly becomes suspicious given how his sergeant says to rule it out as an accidental death rather than an actual case. And throughout the game, you'll be learning more of what happened, uncover more killings, and try to stop his serial killer from killing all the rich people. One thing we learn about James at the start of the game is that he's probably in a new body right now, since there's been mentions of a sync test by his sergeant, which I would guess at this point of the game, with what we know, to be regular checks to make sure you're not rejecting the body, among other things such as having hallucinations of these threads appearing. And along with a potentially traumatic experience of being placed into a new body, James is also haunted by the memories of his dead wife, who we get to see throughout the game. And at some point you begin to realize that the mystery isn't the main part of the story. And yeah, I get it, that's the whole point of a detective story, the who done it and why. But given the game's mechanics, which we'll talk about soon, the story takes a backseat to James, his trauma, and how fucked up New York in 2329 actually is. And a part of the reason I say that the main mystery isn't the primary focus is because these investigation sections are very linear and straightforward. James has a few tools he can use to investigate these crime scenes, with one being a device called the Reconstructor, which allows him to reconstruct the scene in action, going back in time and finding out how everything fell into place. And while you're using this device, you'll see these yellow time bubble areas, and you're meant to find an item in there to continue to reconstruct the scene. Now that's all well and good, but the problem is that the investigation becomes more of a find the object scenario rather than finding items of interest on your own. James also has other tools such as this X-ray device to see through walls and locate things like wires and pipes, as well as a UV light to follow footprints or trails of blood. And at some points in the game, you'll be asked to piece together clues to find a lead, and this itself is also very linear. There's no consequences for making a wrong connection, given how you can just undo it until you find the right solution, so there'll always be one outcome when piecing together these clues, and I feel like this is a huge missed opportunity with this game. You'd think that with a detective game, you'd have some chances where you need to solve puzzles and use your intuition and detective skills to try and piece together evidence to help with your case, but really, this is more of finding where you need to go to move the story along. And what I did appreciate was trying to explore as much as you can, finding every interactable object and such could unlock other dialogue options investigations, and to be honest, that's kinda neat, but it doesn't really do much to really change the story, and this is something that tends to hold the game back. When piecing together clues, you can't come to the wrong conclusion. You'll be told that there's no connection, and you can just undo and try with another piece of evidence, and I think that you should be allowed to come to different conclusions even if it's completely wrong, because that's the beauty that comes with player interactivity, something that this game doesn't do all too well, and it's fine if it doesn't if it was like a visual novel or something like Ace Attorney, but in a detective game, I'd hope to have had some moments where my deduction was either not quite right and led to some alternate path, either showing James to not be all there or completely wrong and could lead to a game over, and I'd have to go back and try again. The investigations and evidence board sections feel really handholdy, such as telling you how far back you need to reconstruct and to tell you where the item you need to keep reconstructing even is, and that takes away some of the fun of figuring out a case or solving a puzzle, and if I'm being honest, these really aren't puzzles. And as far as I know, there's only two endings to the game, a good ending and a bad ending, and from what I understand, it's entirely based on one dialogue option you pick during the penultimate chapter. Actually, is there a word for that? What's it called? Anti-penultimate. Huh. Well, alright then. So in the anti-penultimate chapter, that's never going to not feel weird to say, you have the option of saying whether it was the killer who was behind everything or Edward Green, the first victim you investigate. And this option, as far as I know, is what determines your ending, or at least unlocks dialogue to determine your ending. And part of the reason on why I said the murder mystery takes a back seat is that during the second investigation, you get in contact with the supposed serial killer through your earpiece that you use to talk with Sarah, and this takes the entire allure out of it. With the first investigation, you'll find yourself wondering how Edward Green was murdered, who did it to him, whether or not it could be someone he's close to, and that mystery is gone entirely when the serial killer comes in contact with you. It starts to go from a whodunit to a where is this guy mystery, as you try and find traces and evidence on who this person even is. So my focus ended up being shifted away from who could have done this crime to, wow, this future really is a special kind of hell. Someone should do something about this. And I mean, when you're automatically enrolled in a subscription service at the age of 21 to keep your body or someone else will take it, it takes the whole only animal that has to pay to live on this planet to a fucked up extreme. And given this system is perpetuated by the rich, like our initial victim Edward Green, you start to realize what the motivation of the serial killer is. And honestly, I started to get it, especially when they tried to convince James to destroy the Icarite of a temporarily dead rich person whose family were the inventors of Icarite. And like, yeah, I'm on board, let's do it, let's destroy the lives of rich people. Fuck them. But again, this has pulled me away from the mystery of the crime, where initially I wondered who could have done this to Green. Was it someone close to him? Was it a murder-suicide? Which is what I initially thought this was? What does this whole Ouroboros symbol represent? All this completely left my mind as soon as the killer got in contact with us, and there's some reveals down the line I'm not going to mention because this is a story-focused game, and giving story spoilers in this video just kind of ruins the point of it, but the big reveal for me didn't happen until the anti-penultimate section of the game. Hey, look at that, using the new word we learned. And it all felt a bit disappointing because it was showing me what it was without giving me hints to figure it out. And I'm sure a second playthrough is going to show a lot more to me, but I already know what happens and what's going on, so the reaction ends up feeling more like, oh yeah, that does kind of make sense, instead of a, wow, I didn't realize they planted that from the beginning. One thing this game does like to do is bring up references to Greek mythology, and you've probably picked up on some of it, like how Icarite is very similar to Icor, the blood of the gods, or that there's an airship called the Icarus, and its patrons are rich people, and it ends up crashing and burning because the rich are flying too close to the sun, when really, I think they're flying too close to this fucking building. And James is sure to mention the irony in the name just in case you missed that symbolism. And given these two examples, you might notice that a lot of these references are also a bit on the nose. The first one I recall is that when you enter the building to retrieve Green's Icarite, James mentions that being above the clouds is being in Olympus, and that the elites are as gods here. But the one that I realized way too late is how the Icarite we see in James's hallucinations look like threads, and that's when I realized that these are probably meant to be like the threads of fate that are spun by the Moirai, and I only picked up on this because the final area you go to has a giant statue of the Moirai, and how these threads look to be unraveling could also symbolize how no one is meant to live forever, and this story's theme could have some sort of Sisyphean aspect to it. Not the rolling the boulder stuff, but the cheating death part of the story. All that being said, I'm also not as well read on Greek mythology here as opposed to something like Norse mythology, so I can't really say whether the use of Greek mythology here is to be used for symbolism or if the writers just thought it was kinda cool to include, and honestly, I hope it's the latter, because if you're gonna write something and you wanna add something you like, then just fucking go for it, dude. And that's mostly what I have to say about it. It's like a 6-hour long game, and for a narrative-driven game that is also the debut title for these developers, despite my issues with it, I think it's actually really well done. There are moments that could be improved, such as taking advantage of the medium by adding in more player interactivity and just letting go of the player's hand for them to explore and figure things out on their own, and for the 6 hours it took for me to get to the ending, I liked it, and I believe I honestly would have liked it more if I knew what I was getting myself into, especially with how the investigations play out. And again, I was more interested in the world building they had for this game. I wanted to find out how Icarite worked, how did everyone else feel about it, how these hallucinations that James had worked, and if more people experienced it themselves. These are the kind of things that I hope the developers will take into consideration if and when they work on their next game, because with Nobody Wants to Die, they've got something here. It just needs to be nurtured. The main thing I want you to take away from all this is that if you find some game on Steam that just materialized in front of you and a handful of screenshots grab your attention and you can afford it, just fucking go for it. Who knows what you'll find? Maybe you'll end up with your own moments of dumb fun. Maybe you'll find your next favorite game or the next hidden gem. Live a little. Pirate Disco Elysium. Bring back the guillotine.